are listening to Stories from Palestine podcast, a podcast recorded in Palestine and about Palestine. My name is Crystal. I am originally from the Netherlands and I am married to a Palestinian. We live in Beit Jalla between Jerusalem and Bethlehem, and we run Singer Cafe and al-Jisr Bar in Beit Zahur. Before moving to Palestine in 2013, I worked as a teacher and tour guide in the Netherlands. I have a degree in history and in tour guiding and many years of tour guiding experience. Due to the COVID pandemic, tourism in Palestine came to a complete halt, and that's why I started Stories from Palestine podcast in August 2020. This is the second year of the podcast, with every week on Monday a new episode about the history and heritage of Palestine, as well as the reality of life today. I hope you will enjoy today's episode. Today's episode was recorded during our visit to Muaddi Arak Distillery in Beit Jalla. As you know, I'm also a tour guide in Palestine, and I like to organize trips that are a little bit different than the usual pilgrims tours, not only to the churches and the known sites, but really to discover the history and heritage of Palestine. And that's why I organized a trip to Muaddi's Arak Distillery in Beit Jalla. And this episode was recorded while we were visiting the distillery with a group of about 15 people. I had no clue that you could learn so much about the art of Arak distillation, and it was a great pleasure to spend an hour with Nader Muaddi, and I hope you will enjoy listening to this episode.
Welcome everyone. My name is Nader Muaddi. I'm originally from Taibat, Ramallah, but I've been living in Bethlehem for 12 years now. We've been here in Beit Jalla mainly. This is my wife Rula, and together we are the Muaddi Craft Distillery. So welcome everyone. It's great to have you here. It's great to drink some Arak with you all. I'm going to be talking about Arak, all things Arak. I'll probably start with the ancient history, then we'll go into the process, then we'll come back here, we'll talk about the modern history, and I'll tell you a bit more about my story, and then we can have some questions and answers. Sounds good, yeah? So we'll start over here with the ancient history of Arak. Arak is a spirit that I'm very enthusiastic about, I'm very passionate about, and that's why I started this whole business completely all about Arak. I don't make wine, I don't make any other spirits. It's a distillery dedicated 100% just to making Arak. I think it's a spirit that's under-recognized and underappreciated, and I think that it deserves more respect than what it's given, and I'm here to tell you why that's my perspective when it comes to drinking Arak. Arak is the oldest spirit in the world. It's every single spirit, whether it's whiskey, gin, tequila, whatever, distills from, it basically comes from the roots of Arak. Arak's history goes back to the 8th to 9th century, and it really starts with this guy, Jaber Bin Hayan. Jaber Bin Hayan, it was at this time, Europe was in the Dark Ages, and the Arabs were having a Renaissance period where they're taking off, continuing where the Greeks and the Romans had left off in terms of mathematics and science, and they're making a lot of achievements. This guy, he was making a lot of scientific advancements, a lot of mathematic advancements. Algebra is even named after him. Algebra comes from Jaber. And he was based in Baghdad, and he was the first person documented in the world to distill alcohol. And he said that it's of little practical use, but of scientific significance nonetheless. Now, he was a scientist, but he was also a devout Muslim. So for him, alcohol, already wine and beer, which have been around for thousands of years in the region, were already, as intoxicants forbidden. But for him, he appreciated the scientific value of recognizing that this is something new. He created the first rudimentary periodic table, as well as the tools to be able to isolate different compounds from any mixture. So he actually created the still, which is a distillation apparatus. You can see a big one over there. We'll get to it in a bit. And this is the earliest manuscript on distillation. It was also written in Iraq around the year 1100. It's now like many of our artifacts in the Museum of London. And this is just another way that's showing that distillation's roots are really in the Middle East, comes from here. At the same time Jaber Bin Hayan was living, we also had this guy living in the same city during the same period. This is Abu Nuwas. Abu Nuwas was a poet, and he was the complete opposite of Jaber Bin Hayan. Jaber Bin Hayan lived a long, healthy life and died an old man. This guy died like in his 40s or 50s from too much partying. He was into opiates, he was into bisexuality, he was in and out of jail, he was getting in bar fights, he was a profusive alcoholic, you name it. Anything that was forbidden at the time, he lived for. But because Arabs appreciate art, he's a master of the Arabic language. He's a poet that's unrivaled till today. And it's really his poetry that people appreciated and gave him the respect that he still has. And he made two very important quotes. One was, he said one of his many inspirations or motivations is a wine, the color of rainwater, that burns in the chest like a firebrand. So that wine, the color of a rainwater, transparent wine that burns in the chest, is probably the earliest reference to a distilled spirit. He also made another quote where he said he has a drink that if you add water to it, it lightens up. And that's also probably the earliest reference to arak. So we know that people were consuming distilled spirits and consuming arak during the period that Abu Nuwas was alive, which was a very brief period. He lived for about 40, 45 years, and it was around the 8th to 9th century. Now, why would Jaber Bin Hayan, a devout Muslim, create a still to distill alcohol? He didn't create it to distill alcohol. He created the still to refine the process of making al-kuhl, eyeliner. Back in the days during the medieval period, eyeliner was the medieval Ray-Bans. You would put eyeliner around your eyes to absorb the sunlight so you can see during the day when it's very bright and very hot. So he created it. It didn't work for that purpose. So he began looking for other purposes to use it. And he created for making al-kuhl. When people began distilling wine, they didn't know what to call it. They called it al-kuhl after the eyeliner, which is what it was used for. And when it reached European ports, it became alcohol. And you can see, according to the Oxford Dictionary, the word al-kuhl, or alcohol, comes from the word al-kuhl, from eyeliner. And now, beyond that, we're talking about what other uses the Jaber Bin Hayan used the still for. He was also into pharmacology, into medicine, developing new medicines out of herbs, basically taking the essential oils from the herbs, distilling them. And we know through many years of practice, we know that if you drink a certain herb, it helps you with your stomach, it helps you with your throat. He wanted to get more concentrated oils from these herbs to make more potent medicines, to develop the first medicines. At the time, they were distilling a lot of herbs and stripping these herbs of their essential oils, taking it out of the herbs. So we know that a lot of people were distilling herbs on their stills. Today, we know that if you're going to distill, you usually distill for two purposes, either for alcohol or for herbal essential oils. But you should never use the same still to do both of them. Because what happens if you're distilling herbal essential oils, you build up those oils inside your still. And then when you distill alcohol, they leach into your drink. So you'll end up getting those herbal oils and flavors inside your drink. Now we know at the same time, aniseed, which is right over there, was a cash crop. It was highly sought after for its herbal essential oil. Because it's very aromatic and very flavorful, it was used for perfumery. It was also used at the same time for sweets and delicacies to add new flavors. And it was also used for many different ailments, mainly abdominal ailments. Anyone who had stomach pains, colic, they were using aniseed at the time. And because it had these different uses, anyone who was distilling herbal essential oils at the time was most likely distilling alcohol. So we presume that someone was distilling aniseed and it leached into al-kuhl, which was a neutral spirit. And from that, you had your first anise spirit by coincidence. People drank it, they preferred the anise flavor to the neutral al-kuhl, and then they decided that they would introduce more anise to give it more flavor. And when they did that, they had to slow down the distillation process, because when you put the anise in the still on a high flame, you'll burn the anise and it gives it bitterness. So you have to keep it on a slow flame, and the drops come out of the still drop by drop, and those drops resemble the drops of people as they're sitting down in hot weather next to their hot stills. So they named the spirit arak, which is the Arabic word for sweat. So that's where it comes from. So that's the ancient history of arak. Yeah? Now, over here we have a map of the world. I don't know if you can recognize this map, but we have the word south up here and the word north down here. At the time, if you flip it over, it makes more sense. Here's the Arabian Peninsula. This is North Africa. Here's Europe. All of sub-Saharan Africa, Australia didn't exist. They never found it. The Americas didn't exist. But at the time, this is the world that they knew. But they didn't draw the maps like this. They drew the maps like this because the Europe was in the Dark Ages and the Arabs were in their Renaissance and they were enlightened. They saw themselves as superior. So they wanted to put themselves above the Europeans. So the maps are like this, and there was already very well-established Islamic trade routes throughout the world, from the Far East all the way throughout the continental Europe. So just as al-kuhl began approaching shores, shortly after arak was made, it began approaching all of the shores of the Mediterranean basin. And every country soon developed an offshoot, a direct relative of arak. And we have pastis in France. You have anisado and anisetta in Spain and in Portugal. You have ouzo in Greece, raki in Turkey. The Turks call raki because they discovered it in Iraq. And to them it was Iraqi. Iraqi is raki. And every country in the Mediterranean basin, whether it's sambuca in Italy, dishpuro in near Cyprus as well. We have in Boucha, they made it from dates in Tunis. In Morocco, they made it from figs in Tunis, and they called it Boucha. They made it from dates in Morocco, they called it Mahia. Every country adopted an anise-flavored spirit. And it began to fit within the diet that was developing in the cuisine in the area, because arak, it's seen as a palate cleanser. Throughout the Mediterranean, we indulge in mezze and tapas, and when you dip into one dish, which is zesty, and you dip into another one, which is spicy, and you go into another one that has an umami flavor, all these flavors, they start to battle on your palate, and they conflict with one another. So the idea with arak is that you dip into one dish, you taste it, you take a sip, you dip into the other, and it basically resets your palate and refreshes it so you can get the most out of the dish. So it fit very well into our cuisine. Until today, every country in the Mediterranean maintains an anise-flavored spirit, regardless of where they are. Every country in the Mediterranean has an offshoot of arak. But it's not only those anise-flavored spirits that came off of arak. We have, for example, when Spain and Portugal occupied the Americas, they brought with them their anisado and their aniseta, their version of arak. And throughout Latin America, you have a drink called aguardiente, which is also an anise-flavored spirit that they got from the Spaniards and the Portuguese, who got it from the Arabs. And then you also have, for example, the Philippines, also a former Spanish colony. They drink anisado till today. It not only went west, but it went east as well. When the Mongols, hordes of Genghis Khan, when they came, they occupied Central Europe and they began entering into the area of Iraq. They brought back with them arak to China, and during the Ming Dynasty, it was documented that the first distilled spirits was arak. And the Chinese began trying to copy it. But they didn't have grapes, they had rice wine, so they began distilling their rice wine, and they didn't have aniseed, they had star anise. And they began using the star anise to emulate arak. They soon dropped the star anise. They created a drink called beiju, which is just a neutral distilled rice wine. Reached Korea, became soju. Reached Japan, became sake. When the drinks further went north, people didn't have grapes, they had grains. So they began using wheat and rye and barley. They also didn't have clay pots. They used to age things in oak barrels. The oak added color and it added flavor, and they didn't have the anise to give it, so they began keeping the anise out of it. And that's how you had your first whiskeys that were born, your first brown spirits. When those countries went and they occupied the Caribbean and they spread throughout, they also brought with them, when they went to the Caribbean, they didn't find grains, they found sugarcane. From there you got your rums. When it went to Mexico, they found agave, you had your mezcal and your tequila. So every distilled spirit comes from this spirit. This is a mother spirit, and it's our national spirit. And we should be proud of it, because really it created drinking culture and cocktail culture around the world, because this is the original distilled spirit, and it comes from our land. So we should be proud of it, and it's something we should cherish. So that's the ancient history in a nutshell.
Now sitting on the front of a bar is going to be absolutely different.
Yeah.
You're staring at a map of history of...
There you go. So, yeah.
We should drink to that.
We should drink to that. صحتكم. So now we'll move into the process of how arak is made. Yeah? So we'll come into the distillery area.
Crystal was nowhere to be seen until we said we should drink to that.
So we have this great spirit called arak. How do we make arak? How is arak made? Arak is made first and foremost from grapes. In Palestine, the second most cultivated crop after the olive tree is the grapevine. We have 23 indigenous species of grapes that are native to Palestine. These are ancient varietals that are generally unknown to the Western world. Thousands of years old. They're even mentioned in the Old Testament, some of them. Of the 23 species, about 8 of them are useful for making wine and spirits. 4 are red and 4 are white. I use 4 white varietals called the Buki, Hamdani, Jandali, and Zaini. So those are the varietals that I use to make arak. And the reason that these ones are suitable is because they don't have a lot of flesh, but they have a lot of juice. So this area right now, when we talk about Western Bethlehem, Northern Hebron, that's the Bordeaux of Palestine. That's where 85% of Palestine's grapes grow. They grow within this one area. Our second most cultivated crop grows just west of Bethlehem, north of Hebron. This area, Israel calls it the Gush Etzion settlement block. And it's home to 22 settlements, and it has 6 Palestinian villages in the area. And right now, it's at risk of being de facto annexed. Israel is building the wall around the area. They're laying out infrastructure, making a highway. It might become an area that's beyond the barrier and inaccessible in the near future. And in that case, we might lose 85% of our second most cultivated crop. So I'm actually here. It makes sense for me to be in Beit Jalla because it's right on the fringe of Bethlehem and it's very close to the grapes. It's easy to get the grapes in and out. So the first part of making arak is I work with local farmers. I distribute these baskets to them behind you. They fill them up. They bring them into the distillery. I take them and I dump them inside this. This is a crusher destemmer. So basically it takes the berries off of the stems. The stems come out separately and it crushes the berries. We collect the berries inside little buckets and we take them and we dump them inside these tanks. During this period, when you look at grapes, they have like a white dust on them. That white dust is natural yeast from the environment. So we make our base wine, a white wine, the way you make a red wine. In most countries, when you make a white wine, you automatically take the skins off of the juice and you let just the juice ferment alone. And most commercial distilleries, they also introduce an agent that kills all the bacteria. And then they introduce their own yeast strain that gives them more predictable results in terms of alcohol content, aroma, and flavor. We do it the old way, which is doing a wild yeast fermentation. So we let the natural yeast from the environment on the skins. We just crush the grapes. When those yeasts get in touch with the sugar in the juice, they begin consuming the sugar and creating alcohol and CO2 and a little bit of sulfur. And in that process, that's how we make wine. So the first part of making arak is to make wine, because we know, like we said, Jaber Bin Hayan, he distilled wine to make al-kuhl. That's the basis of making alcohol, is distilled wine. So we take it, we put it in these tanks. During the first week, the yeast, it's very energetic. It's a living organism, a single-cell organism. So it begins to interact with the sugar, consuming it, and it populates rapidly. After the first week, we take it, we dump all the grapes back inside this press, and then we basically press the skins and we remove the skins from the juice. At that point, 70% of the sugar has been consumed and turned into alcohol. We take the juice, we put it back in here, you end up with something that looks like this. And you can see it's very dark because it's on the skins. We take it, we put it back in another tank, and then the fermentation process slows down. Why does it slow down? Because they're single-cell organisms, so they're a bit stupid. When the alcohol rises, basically they're killing themselves. They're producing this alcohol, and then the alcohol kills them off, and then they just basically drop to the bottom, and they become these little sediment at the bottom of the bottle. If you want, you can pass it around. You can show. So that's the idea. So we make this base wine. So it takes about 3 weeks to basically ferment out the remaining 30% of the sugar and to turn it into a wine. After we make our base wine, we come over to the distillation process over here. There's many different kinds of stills. You have stills for making vodka, for making whiskey, for making cognac. This is an Arabian still. This is the first type of still in the world, and you can see it's very similar to that manuscript over at the entry that I showed you earlier. The Arab still is known for having a very dome-shaped head and then having a linarm that goes straight down. So the first part of distillation is we take that wine, we fill it up, we put it inside the still, and then we close off all the pores with dough. And that's so the vapors don't escape, because if alcohol vapor escapes, one, we're losing alcohol, and two, you're having highly flammable vapors next to a flame, it can combust. Not good. So we take it, we bring the wine to a boil. The first distillation, we call it the stripping run. We're basically just reducing the content of the wine, creating a crude spirit, and the idea is just concentration. We want to remove the water and concentrate the alcohol. So we basically fill it up with wine, we bring it to a boil, it vaporizes, collects in the head, the vapor travels down this arm, and inside here there's a coil, and around that coil we have water. And that water basically keeps the coil cold. So when we cool the vapor, we condense it back into a liquid. The liquid comes out, we collect it inside little stainless jars. After we collect the alcohol, that alcohol you can't consume it. Because when you look at wine, there's many things in wine, they're 1 part per million, 1 part per 2 million. It's not toxic, but when you concentrate those compounds, they become toxic to your body. There's things like methanol, acetone, formaldehyde, there's fusel oils, a lot of things that are just nasty. Either they smell bad, they hurt your head, they give you a bad hangover, or they're poisonous. Like methanol will attack your optical nerves, you'll go blind. So then you have to do a second distillation. We take that, we put it back in the still, we fire it up. The first distillation is very brief. It's like 6 to 8 hours on a high flame. The second distillation is very slow. Put it on a low flame, it vaporizes, and it lasts about 24 hours. I'll just sit here with a case of water, trying to dilute all the toxic compounds that I'm putting in my mouth. And basically what we do is we let it vaporize, comes out drop by drop, and I have a thermometer and I have an alcoholometer. They give me indicators for what liquid is coming out. Because every compound has a different boiling point, we have an idea of the sequence of what's going to come out first, second, third, and so on. But you can't rely purely on the thermometer or on the alcoholometer. You really have to rely on your senses, and that's the craft part of it. So it's a craft and a science. It's a mixture of both. So when it comes out, I use three things basically to identify. One is taste, one is viscosity, feeling how oily it is, and the other one is smell. And basically identifying those different compounds, I can make what we call our cuts. And then I basically divide the spirit into 4 sections. You have the 4 shots, which is your poison, it's your methanol. I put it in that container over there. After that, you have your heads. The heads are not poisonous, but they're very pungent and they're very strong. And it has like a paint thinner type smell. If you put it on your tongue, it's very bitter. It causes your palate to bite back. Obviously, I get rid of that. I keep that aside. We use that for cleaning. And then you have your hearts. Your hearts is your pure ethanol. And the pure ethanol has a natural sweetness to it. I take that, and that's the basis of my arak. I put it aside. Then after that, you have your tails. The tails basically smells like a wet dog. It's not poisonous, just has a really bad smell, and it's very oily. But you can distill it 1 or 2 more times, so you can get some more hearts out of it. Once I collect all the hearts together, I take it, I put it back in the still, and then I add anise to it. And then I bring it up to, not to a boil, but I heat it up. And then I turn it off, and I go away, come back the next day. When the aniseed absorbs the alcohol, the ethanol, it releases anethol, anise oil. The next day when I come in, I distill it on a very low flame. Again, it's another very long distillation, like 18 hours. The anise oil and the alcohol will vaporize together, get condensed back into one liquid, and then I sit it aside to basically age for about 6 months to a year, however long before it's sold. And then after that, I dilute it, and then we make our arak. We dilute it to 53%. The reason I dilute arak to 53%, it's a standard for arak, is because anise oil is soluble in alcohol, but it's not soluble in water. So as long as the alcohol level is above 50%, it will remain clear. Once it's below 50%, it turns white. So the idea is to bottle it at 53% to give yourself a 3% margin of error. And that's a rule that was made in Lebanon back in, I believe, 1922, when it was still a French mandate. They made the Arak law, which was the first law dictating what is Arak and how it should be made. So that's not obligatory for people to follow, but it's something that I'm following. And that's how we make our arak. That's in a nutshell. Now, arak isn't aged. We say in Arabic, arak ma btit'attak tartah. Why does it relax and not age? There's no point in aging white spirits. There's 2 types of spirits. You have your brown spirits, which are aged in wood, and you have your white spirits, which are the clear spirits. So arak falls in the white spirit category. Nobody ages white spirits. And the reason is because they're white. They don't get any benefit from being aged. Now, when you have brown spirits, they get the majority of their flavor and their brown color from the oak, from the wood. So the longer you age it, the more flavor you can extract. Basically, the idea is contraction and expansion. During the day when it's hot, the wood expands, it releases the alcohol. At night, it contracts, it absorbs the alcohol. And having it contract, absorb, and release over days, over many years, you get your brown spirits to have lots of flavors. Arak, we don't have that because it's not aged in wood. All of its flavor comes from the grapes and the anise alone. So there's no point in aging. But why do we let it relax? Because the anise oil, it's very viscous. It's an oil. It's thicker than alcohol. Now, alcohol is a solvent. Eventually, it'll dilute it. But it takes some time for the oil to dilute and to become one and become a homogeneous mixture with alcohol. So we put it aside. Usually, it takes about 6 months at most. And you'll have a very homogeneous, good spirit that you can start consuming. So that's the process, how it's made in a nutshell. Now we can get into the modern history, if you like. Now we talked about Palestine, we talked about Arak, how it's our native spirit, our national spirit. We talked about how it's a spirit that has a very rich history and how it's really underappreciated. Why is it underappreciated? If you come to Palestine, the number 1 selling spirit is vodka. Number 2 is whiskey. Number 3 is gin. Then you have beer. Then you have wine. Then you have Arak. The consumers of Arak, there's not many out there. The Arak market is very small. Why is it very small? I think it's because Arak basically is a victim of geopolitics from the region. When you talk about this area here, from the turn of the 20th century onwards, it's been one conflict after the other. Conflict creates poverty and creates downturn in economic growth, and people suffer, and they can't afford good arak. Good arak is very expensive to make. For me, it takes about 10 kilos of grapes to make 5 liters of wine to make 1 liter of arak. Because you're distilling it, you're really taking the essence of it. So basically, these 6 barrels right here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. These 6 were 5 tons of grapes. That was 5,000 kilograms. Those 5,000 kilograms are now in 6 barrels that aren't even full. They're like filled like 3/4 capacity. So you're really taking the essence of it, right? So it's very expensive to produce arak. And when you have conflict and you have poverty, people can't afford arak. So the big commercial producers in the region, they were obliged either to continue making authentic arak, and they would only sell to a minority who can afford it, or they would have to make arak for the masses. And that's where you had the birth of commercial arak. So today you have two kinds of arak on the market. You have commercial arak and traditional arak. Now in Palestine, we're having a resurgence of traditional arak. There's a few producers like myself making traditional arak. But the majority of arak that's being produced by far is commercial arak. And these are, like, you're talking in excess of 50,000 bottles per producer. Now, commercial arak, how is it made? When they first began looking for ways to make arak cheaper, how are you going to make it cheaper? You need to reduce labor. You need to reduce materials, inputs. So the first material they got rid of was the grapes. When you get rid of the grapes, by getting rid of them, you're able to make a drink that can be produced year-round. You're not tied to one season, like myself. You can produce arak all year round. You don't have to worry about also fermentation. You don't have to worry about crushing grapes, pressing grapes, making a wine. So you get rid of that whole process, which is very labor intensive, and you get rid of these grapes that tie you to one season a year. What did they replace grapes with? With 96% industrial alcohol. That alcohol usually comes from sugarcane or corn in most cases. There is alcohol made from grape spirit, which you can get abroad, but most people, they go for what's cheaper. So they go for either corn or sugarcane alcohol, which is the most abundant and the cheapest. It comes in at 96% in these plastic containers. They dilute it down and they would distill it with aniseed. And then from that, one distillation, you don't make any cuts because it's already cut, but it's, you know, a very crude cut. You distill it with aniseed and you have an anise flavored spirit. Later on, they got rid of the aniseed altogether. Today, aniseed is not a very popular crop in Palestine. It's only grown just south of Jenin in a handful of villages, and not a lot of it is produced because you have to grow these big fields and you end up making a very little amount. So today you buy a kilo of anise, local anise, it's about 30 shekels, 35 shekels, depending on the season. So it's $10 per kilo. If you're going to buy 1 ton or 2 tons, it's going to cost like 60, 70,000 shekels just in aniseed alone. So most people, they decided, you know, if we're going to get rid of a cost, that's another big expensive cost is the anise. Get rid of the anise and you can also get a cheaper product, maximize profits and reduce the cost for the consumer at the end of the day, make it more affordable for the masses. And getting rid of the anise, how are you going to get the white color? How are you going to get the anise flavor? They began getting already distilled anise essential oils. Most of them come from China and they're made from Chinese star anise, not our anise. It's a very similar flavor, but it's a bit more peppery, so it's got a little bit of a burn to it. And then you began the birth of the cocktail operations, where you get this spirit, it comes in, you dilute it from 96% down to about 50%. Then you add your anise flavoring, and then you get a paint mixer, a power drill, you mix it up, you have arak. In half an hour, you produce what I make in a year. Now the problem is, over here, we don't have, in many countries, you have rules and laws and designations that protect local produce. For example, in France, you have rules that protect what can constitute cognac. Has to be made in the city of Cognac, has to be made from the Uni Blanc grapes, has to be aged in oak for at least 3 years. In the US, you have bourbon, has to be 50% white corn, has to be aged in new American oak barrels. Every country has what's mezcal, what's tequila, what's port wine. You have these protective laws that safeguard these traditional products that we consume that are part of our culinary heritage. Unfortunately, here we don't have that. We don't even have laws that protect consumers from false advertising. So this commercial arak that was made, people were putting on it arak mtallat, means triple distilled. They were writing min al-'inab wal-yansun al-baladi, from local grapes and aniseed, handmade, authentic, using these words that do not really reflect what the product is. Now you can make a mass-produced commercial arak and it's consumable, you can drink it, and if that's what you can afford, great. But you shouldn't call it something that it's not. So now if you look at Lebanon, the Lebanese Standards Institute, they created 2 categories of arak. You have your traditional arak, which is the 1922 law, unchanged, and you have commercial arak, which is about using anise flavoring and spirits and whatnot and how it should be made. Here we don't have those 2 different designations, so people are marketing commercial arak as if it's traditional arak. When consumers would drink this commercial arak, its taste is inferior to traditional arak, and they got turned away from it. And that's why today the Arak segment is very small. Today, if you go to visit someone, you go to on a holiday, they invite you for lunch, you wouldn't bring a bottle of Arak with you. You'd bring a bottle of scotch or a bottle of French wine. It's seen today, Arak is the poor man's drink. It's this inferior beverage. It's not something that people who have taste look for. People who just want to get drunk would consume it. And that's why today you see like a 750 ml bottle of Arak goes for like 50 shekels. I sell a 500 ml bottle for 150 shekels. So it's 2/3 the volume, but 3 times the price. But the difference is in the quality. And that's really what I'm focusing on. Because for me, I think this is a very important element of our culture, our culinary heritage. And if you want to preserve it, you need to do it in a way that's authentic. Because I feel that the traditional Arak is superior to the commercial Arak in every way. And the only way that you can really preserve a part of your heritage is if you celebrate it on a daily basis. People are consuming it, they're enjoying it. If you go to Lebanon, up until the Civil War, they had the same situation where we had. They had very poor Arak that was being produced during the first part. They were fortunate actually. They were occupied by the French. We were occupied by the British. The French distillation is very much part of their heritage. So home distillation was not outlawed in Lebanon or Syria. Until today, every home has like one of these stills in different sizes and they're distilling. They make wine in October and then they drink it through the winter. Once spring hits, whatever's left over, they distill it and they make Arak. And every home, it's a very common, this is like an agricultural tool that every house has in Lebanon. The Brits, they outlawed distillation because they wanted to basically regulate the alcohol trade and they wanted to profit from taxation. It's imperialism, basically. I mean, they're trying to exploit the countries. And they created a formula, and off of that formula, they calculated the percentage of alcohol, the amount of liquid. They came up with a formula that basically for them, they were able to tax you per bottle. And if you wanted to distill, you had to have a distillery that was licensed by the government. You have to pay your customs, your VAT, all these taxes. And then after that, Jordanian law, Israeli law, Palestinian law was all based on British law, and they continued to carry that over. So we lost a part of our heritage that was for more than 1,000 years practiced in the region. We lost it basically due to the British. While the French, when they occupied Lebanon and Syria, I'm telling you, while Lebanon was still a French mandate in 1922, they passed Arak law. And home distillation today is commonly practiced throughout Lebanon and Syria because it was never banned. Until today, you still have Arak Baladi, which is the local Arak that's being produced. Here in Palestine, we only have a handful of people that are still making it, mainly in Beit Jalla. A few old people are doing it. They don't really know the science behind it, but they do it the way that they've been taught from their parents and their grandparents and so on. So it's a craft for me that when I went into how did I get into this? I enjoy Arak. When I grew up in the States. I grew up in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and we had a very closely knit Palestinian community. We have about 10,000 Palestinians in my city, besides Jordanians and Lebanese and Syrians and Iraqis and Egyptians. And anytime we had a national holiday, whether it was the 4th of July or Thanksgiving or Memorial Day or Labor Day, we would all get together and we'd go to a national park and we'd do a very Arab gathering. While Americans would be flipping burgers, we'd be flipping kebabs, and we'd be all the way to bring mazzeh. And while Americans were drinking their beer, we were drinking Arak. And for little boys, when you would see men drinking Arak, you automatically assumed it was something macho, something manly to do. So you would try to steal a glass. That would be the idea. And to be honest, for a kid who's 12, you can really drink Arak. It's sweet. It tastes good. I can't imagine many 12-year-olds drinking scotch or drinking cognac, right? It would be too much. They would show us these magic tricks, the grown-ups, they would get a clear glass and then clear glass, and they would pour it on top and it would turn white, and they'd be like, wow, we turned the water into milk. It's a miracle. And so for us, it was something amazing, and we wanted to copy these older people, and we would steal a glass and drink it in secret and pretend that we're macho and so on. So I grew up drinking Arak. I really enjoy it. I think if you're going to eat Palestinian food, Arak, it's unrivaled. It's the drink for our cuisine. It would honestly be a travesty to drink anything else with Palestinian food. And when I came here, I was shocked that we didn't have the Arak that we had in the States. We had better quality Arak in the States, mainly from Lebanon. And I was looking for Arak. I found out that because Israel occupies the West Bank, they control what items come in and out. And Lebanon and Syria are considered enemy states, so you can't import Lebanese or Syrian goods. So the only way we can get it is through Jordan. So if you know someone going to Jordan, or if you're going to Jordan, you would ask them to bring Arak, or you would bring Arak back. So the authentic Lebanese Arak comes in basically through suitcases, through Jordan. It's a quick way to burn out favors. You're constantly nagging people to bring you Arak. And I remember one day I was sitting with a friend, and he just said, you're an idiot. You're spending so much money on Arak, and you might as well just make your own Arak. And I thought about it, and I was like, a light bulb moment, and that's where it came from. And to be honest, if you find an authentic bottle of Arak here in Palestine, you find there's a lot of counterfeit Lebanese Arak, locally produced, but it's got Lebanese labels. The way to tell if it's real Arak or not is if you have 20 bottles on a shelf, and it's never like cut out from the market. It's always available. It's most likely not authentic. But if there's only 1 or 2 bottles and it's there for a period of time and you don't see it for another 6 months, it's probably authentic. That's the way to figure it out. Because the real arak is brought in suitcases, not in like droves. We don't have any people here who import bulk Lebanese arak. So I began trying to produce it. I asked some of these older people around how to do it. From what I've read online, it's as much a science as an art, this craft. And I found out that like they do it their own way, but they don't really have an understanding for the science, but they still produce it and they're able to produce it. They just do it the way they've been seeing their parents do it. I wasn't comfortable with that way, so I wanted to look more into it. So I learned how to make cognac in order to make arak. Because cognac, it's a distilled grape brandy. It's double distilled. And all you do is you add that third stage, which is adding the anise, and you don't age it in oak. So I learned how to make cognac in order to make arak. I started making arak in 2010 at home. And then from there, I just basically, I began producing more and more. The first arak I made tasted like crap. Your ego gets the best of you because when you invest time and effort, automatically you assume it's the best thing in the world, and it's not. But you have to be objective and step away from your ego and assess it. But it's good to have friends around who will drink it and spit it out immediately. And then after that, I began, slowly improving and tweaking it and modifying it. And when I found something that I enjoyed and that many other people enjoyed, and then people began offering me money for it, I said, why not make a business out of it? We already invested so much time and effort and research. I might as well, try and turn it into something profitable. And from there, we had the birth of Arak Muaddi. This is our 5th anniversary this year. And we've been around 5 years. Every year we've sold out so far. And now we're starting to produce limited edition batches, which are more complex araks. This year, every 3 months, we're releasing a limited edition batch in celebration of our 5th anniversary. Last month, we released our first Arak Muaddi Black, which is, with the limited editions, I'm going the opposite way. This is ultra authentic arak. With the limited editions, I'm doing something more innovative. I'm trying to put my own touch on arak. So with the limited edition, we have a shelf on a bottle on the shelf over there of the black arak, but that's waiting for my father to come visit so we can drink it together. It sold out in 24 hours. I made 53 bottles. And basically, it was arak, and I aged it in Palestinian oak. In Palestine, the oak tree, it's very rare. It's a crime to cut it down. We had a storm in Makhrour a few years ago, and a tree fell down in front of my friend's house. And my friend's friend asked my friend to cut it up with a chainsaw and take away the logs. And he took them and he gave them to me. We aged it for a year to dry. Because in Europe and abroad, you have oak trees that grow very high. Here, they only grow the size of about an olive tree. It's a much more dense wood. So my hypothesis was if the wood is more dense and the grain is more dense, the flavor would be more dense. And then from there, basically what I did was I took them, I cut them into like staves with an axe to open up the grain. And then my wife and I, we broke it into 4 separate groups. And we basically like cooked them in the oven for 4 different temperatures for 4 different periods of time. And we were able to caramelize the sugar in the grains to get different flavors. We got almond, we got vanilla, we got caramel, strong vanilla, and a little bit of tobacco. And we basically put it inside the arak for 3.5 years. And we created Arak Muaddi Black, which was released just last March. And then we have our next limited edition coming out in July and so on every 3 months. Every quarter, we're going to release a limited edition this year in celebration of the 5-year anniversary. So that's my story in a nutshell, the story of Arak Muaddi, the story of arak in general. And I'd be more than happy to address any questions that you might have. Thank you.
I'm so blessed to have you.
No, we're impressed to have you guys. If you have any questions, I'd be more than happy to address them.
I have many questions.
Go for it, shoot. Yeah.
Well, I bought your arak in 2019, and I think is it handwritten? How many? Like this bottle of that.
Yeah.
Bottles? That was just a few hundred, right?
Yeah.
2019.
In 2019, my first batch release was in 2018.
Yeah.
It was a 2017 harvest. Every bottle I make, I hand sign over our guarantee. I have a guarantee called handcrafted in single batches using strictly authentic ingredients and methods. So that's my guarantee. I hand sign every bottle on top of my guarantee. And then I put the vintage, the year we harvested the grapes, the date that I bottled the bottle, and the number of bottles. So it's like, I think in 2019, I think it was like 500 bottles. 503, I think.
Yeah.
So so I would put 1 of 503, 2 of 503, 3 of 503, and I numbered each one, and that's how I do it. And every year for the first bottle that I release, I write a handwritten message on the back of it for whoever gets it. These little traditions that we have. I also have a thing at home called an infinity bottle, which is a bottle. It's a bottle that never runs out, basically. It's from my first batch of arak back in 2010. And every year, when I make a new batch, I drink a little bit of the old one, and I add the new one on top of it. So this bottle, it's got every vintage inside one bottle, and it never runs out because I take a little bit like a glass and I fill up a glass. So I have 2 friends who help me out during the grape season. And every year when we're done the grape season, we take 3 glasses and then I compensate with a new batch. So that's how we do it.
Just one question. We went to visit the Samaritans recently.
Yeah.
And they had this Samaritan Arak.
Yeah.
60% alcohol.
Yeah. The Samaritans are very known for their Arak. Yeah.
Right. So why is it 60%? And what do you know about the difference between that and...
The Samaritans are Palestinians. So they make the Arak the way we make our Arak. The Samaritans are very well known for their Arak. And they have a monopoly on the alcohol trade in Nablus. Up on Jabal Jarzim, they have a liquor store, and it's where you can get all your alcohol from. But the guy who owns the store, he also has a still, and he distills Arak. And it's very much part of their culture. They've been producing quality traditional Arak for countless generations, like as far back as Arak goes. The Samaritan Arak, it's become something that they're known for. They're known for astrology and they're known for Arak. I mean, those are 2 things that they're known for. And the store that sells all the different liquor also sells the Arak that they make. The reason it's 60%, I don't know why. The minimum is 53. There's no cap on how high you can make it. But most people here, like in general, Arak Baladi, the homemade Arak, usually it's more potent. And I think it's just because they don't use an alcoholometer. So they just like whatever comes out of the still, they might add a little bit of water and they bottle it. So I don't know if that's why it's 60%, but that's just a presumption on some of the people that I've met here that they just make it. They don't make it in a very technical way. They make it in a general way, the way they've seen it made for years, and they don't really pay attention to some elements, how much to dilute it or things like that, and they don't know how to measure the alcohol, something like that. So.
Question 2, the British outlawed these at home so they could commercialize it or monopolize it.
Yeah.
Does that law still exist?
The law still exists. You cannot own a still unless you have home distillation is illegal. If you want to have a still, you basically have to have a license to operate a distillery. Also in the West Bank, we have something called a dual use list, which is basically a list of items that are forbidden to be sold in the West Bank because they can be used for both a civilian and military purpose. And apparently this is on that list as well. So you can isolate any compound in a liquid composition can be isolated. So I mean, that's the idea. I don't know what it could be used for I don't know the military purpose reason. It's on that list. I have a buddy from Nazareth who's a Palestinian citizen of Israel. So he's not obliged to that list. I ordered it in his name and then loaded it on a truck and drove it here. In Israel, you can buy them for home because most people in Israel buy it for distilling essential oils. That's the reason why they buy it. But then they distill alcohol. So, I mean, yeah.
Can you get your Arak outside of Palestine that being distributed internationally?
Yeah, I mean, right now it's up until this period, it's only been distilled in like 2 retailers in Ramallah, 2 in Bethlehem, 2 in Jerusalem, 1 in Nazareth, 1 in Haifa, and I have a roving distributor in the far north who distributes to all the Palestinian villages like Tarshiha and Ma'aliya and Abunin, all these places I've never been to. But I just sent off 180 bottles that just arrived in New York. I have now an exclusive importer. His name is Jason Bajali. He's originally from Ramallah. He's a Palestinian American. And he has a company called Terra Sancta Trading. And he's the exclusive importer of Karmazan wine, of Philokalia wine, of Shepherd's beer, Arak Ramallah, Arak Jabalna. So he's importing a lot of Palestinian and Lebanese wine, beers, and spirits, and trying to market them for the Western world to introduce people to this new area of it's not really new to them. I mean, we've been producing this for thousands of years. I mean, we're the old area producing this. And he's now become my exclusive importer. We're going to have it in 1 restaurant and 1 store in Philadelphia, in New York, in DC, and Los Angeles. So in every city, we'll have 1 store and 1 restaurant that'll have it. Okay. So I think in DC, it's going to be Albi Restaurant, the Green Zone Bar. In New York, it's going to be Tel Noureen, and I'm not sure where the others are. So I mean, those are...
No other countries yet.
Right now, just in the States. I mean, my volume isn't really that high. I haven't really focused on the volume. I've been like competing internationally in competitions, which is like something you would do if you're trying to get into the international market. Usually you compete in a competition in a country where you want to introduce your product because it builds up local credibility. But for me, I competed in London, Berlin, New York, and Chicago. In the Berlin International Spirits Competition, it was 300 spirits from 17 countries. I got the gold medal in Arak of the Year. In New York, it was 700 spirits from 27 countries. I got the silver medal in Arak of the Year. In the UK, in London, it was 1,400 spirits from 44 plus countries, I think. I got the bronze medal. And then last year, I took it to Chicago, to the Cornell University. They have the International Beverage Testing Institute. And that's not really a competition, but they do an annual evaluation of Asian spirits. They do they do categorical evaluations. And they evaluated my Arak. And the interesting thing is that they do a laboratory test and a taste test. So it's different than the competitions, that they're doing a laboratory analysis of the spirit. And they gave me 93 out of 100 points They gave me a gold medal, and I tied with Arak Iksara from Lebanon. So we're the two highest ranking Araks there. And the reason I did all this was not because I wanted to enter any of those markets. It was basically to tell people here that Arak is something worthy of praise. If experts and competitions abroad are giving it awards, maybe you should give it a chance and try it. So, because the biggest thing I face here is that people say, oh no, I don't like Arak. And I'm like, you never drank Arak. You drank a commercial cocktail that's falsely branded as Arak. Try it and maybe you'll like it. And at least like in my circle, I've been able to convert a lot of people to becoming Arak drinkers.
This is one of the questions I want to ask. First one, is there any kind of like a local inspection? Do they check your quality of your product? Do you have support from some ministries, like government, so-called government here, and local people? Do you have support in any way, whether it's on words or material support?
Okay.
And also another one, who is working here, you and your wife?
I do the production, and I do I do production. My wife does all the social media, the marketing, the sales, all the back end, like the business side, which I hate. And I do basically the production. So she does the business, I do production. During the grape season, I have two friends who come and help me out. So for the first part, I have, I think, 14 licenses. It took me 2 years to get my license. It was a major pain to get it. First, I got from the Ministry of National Economy, they call it Rukhsat Iqamah, that they approved the idea. Then after they approved the idea in theory, I had to get the approval, I had to get a license from the municipality, from the Ministry of Environment, the Ministry of Finance, the Palestinian Standards Institute, the Civil Defense. I had to go back to the National Economy, get a operational license. In addition, I had to register with them as a businessman prior. And then I also had to open a tax file with the Ministry of Finance. And then I had to get another approval from the customs, the Alcohol and Tobacco Customs Authority. And then I was obliged to join the Chamber of Commerce. And I can't remember, the Ministry of Health also has to do an analysis every 3 months of 3 bottles. Even though I only make 1 batch a year, and I tried explaining that a million times, they don't get it. So I told them, you're basically not analyzing the same thing every 3 months, but why don't you understand?
But okay, they do their part.
Yeah, so they do their part. So I have 14 licenses, and January of every year is me dedicated to all these ministries, just going around, asking them to process my papers and renew the licenses. And every one of them tax me on all of those documents. I pay like every year like about $2,000 or $3,000 in just registration fees. In addition to that, for every bottle I make, they charge me 23 shekels for the customs, about 22.6 shekels for the VAT. And then anything I make in profit, they go after me for the income tax. So basically, the system here, it's very bureaucratic, and it's all about trying to milk the business. So the PA makes more off of my bottle than what I do. So I'm basically an employee of the PA now. And unfortunately, I don't get anything back from the PA. And basically, I pay the same taxes, the same formula that applies, the same taxation formula that applies to my bottle, applies to every imported spirit, wine, and beer from abroad. So basically, a bottle of Johnny Walker and a bottle of Arak Muaddi are taxed identically. There's no preferential treatment towards local produce, unfortunately. It's because at the end of the day, if Johnny Walker is not going to open up a distillery here and employ tons of people, here we have almost 40% unemployment. If you give me tax subsidies in comparison to exported goods and don't treat me the same, maybe I'll be able to grow easily. I'll reduce the price. I can get more customers. I can grow. And when I grow, I'll start employing people. You'll have less unemployment. Everyone will benefit. Unfortunately, it's not looked at that way. It's looked at right now, what can I get? And you have to pay all your taxes in advance up front. It's very difficult. It's a pain to do it. But nonetheless, I'm doing it this way because it's the better way to do it. For a couple of years, I was bootlegging and I was doing it legally under the table. And you're always like looking over your shoulder, always worried. This way, at least you're able to have a peace of mind. Exactly, that's the idea. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, sure.
I have a question. Where did you get this from? You locally? Someone did?
Yeah, this was made in the Iberian Peninsula in Spain. Fortunately, because we occupied Spain, they also took some of our heritage, and they maintained the original Arabian still, and they call it the Arabic still. And unfortunately today, you cannot find an Arabic still produced in the Arab world. But I think other than maybe Tripoli and Lebanon, and I think also somewhere near Tartus as well in Syria. Those two places still make stills, but very small. And this is made in Spain because they took that element and they use our stills because they also took a lot of our heritage. Just like, in colonization and conflict, people take things from each other and they trade and cultures and, just how we're very close to the Turks, for example. We've exchanged a lot of food and things like that. The same way they took our still.
Do you explain about the yeast?
Yeah. There's a lot of things that can go wrong with distillation. I mean, one, besides making something poisonous and you can make someone go blind or you can kill their liver. There was a guy, I think, in Beit Jalla a few years ago from Dar Khair. He put his uncle in the ICU. I don't know if you heard about it. Did you hear about it? Yeah. So, I mean, if you do it the wrong way, if you don't know the science, it's a science and art. If you don't know the science, you can do something that can either harm you or harm other people. Yeah. And this can easily explode it can easily catch fire. The idea is when it's on, you should never leave it. You should be by it the whole time. Yeah.
It's brass, right?
It's made from copper, from red copper.
Sorry,
yeah.
Yes.
The reason it's made from copper is because copper, it's very reactive to temperature. So it's easy to heat, easy to cool down. You can adjust the temperature quickly. But also a byproduct when you make the wine is sulfur. And copper is a magnet for sulfur. It creates copper sulfate, and we clean it out after every distillation. And basically sulfur, if you use any other material, the sulfur will get inside your arak, and it'll give it a bitter taste. When you use the copper, you don't get the sulfur inside your dish, inside your cup, and then you end up having something, you can get the sweetness of the alcohol to come through.
Yeah.
Is this related to any type of alcohol or only in Arak?
Any alcohol. Everyone distilling any spirit is always distilling it using copper. Yeah, it's very expensive for copper, but
very heavy.
It
probably cost you the same to ship it.
Yeah, I mean, the cost alone is 20,000 shekels, besides the shipping, besides the taxes, and besides creating a platform. But I mean, yeah, it's a process. But it's if you want to do something right, you need the right materials, the right tools, and that's sort of the way. And I'm trying right now, hopefully, I'm trying really to evangelize people, to get them enthusiastic about Arak, to bring them on board. And I'm trying to really educate them. A lot of people here, because distillation is a craft that we've practiced for many years and it's been uprooted from us. People, they don't know how Arak is made. They don't know it's made from, they think it's made from licorice. They don't know that it's made from grapes. They don't know that it's anise flavored. They don't know the process. They don't know how to tell good Arak from bad Arak. So I'm really trying to build up people's awareness about Arak in general. There's a lot of gimmicks out there about Arak, marketing gimmicks. I'm trying to debunk. There's things saying that you should age Arak, and we talked about there's no value in aging Arak. A lot of people think if you distill it more times, that it's better. Also, that's a gimmick. Basically, it's a second distillation is the most important. If you make good cuts, you make a good Arak. Yeah. Arak only needs to be distilled 3 times. Yeah. You have your stripping run, your cuts, and then you have your anise. And the reason you have to do it 3 times is because if you did your anise run, if you added the anise in the second part, you would have no senses, because the anise is very aromatic. It takes away your sense of smell. It's very flavorful. It takes away your sense of taste. And it's very oily, so it takes away your sense of touch. So you have to do it at the end. So Arak has been triple distilled throughout history. There's a lot of gimmicks out there that people are using to sell Arak, but I find it counterproductive because you're not really raising their education based on any sort of logic. And I think that if I'm able to make people understand the Arak better, then they would appreciate what I do and they would be more inclined to purchase my product. For me, cultural preservation also has an extra layer of value here, because here we're struggling with cultural appropriation. Where Israel, they like everything about Palestinians except the Palestinians. They're trying to take our food, our dance, our music. And for me, if you want to preserve your culture, it's really preserving your identity here. So, for me, that's one of the things. And besides that, this project served multiple different cravings that I had. I grew up in an auto upholstery shop, and when I was my father's child labor. He had a sweat camp of me and my 3 brothers, and we were there after school, weekends, summers, just ripping out headliners, pulling out seats, stripping carpets. We were his child labor, and he was his father's. But that actually gave me different things where I felt like I wanted always to do something with my hands, and this allows me to do that. I don't like sitting behind the desk typing on a keyboard. This allows me, every day I'm always busy. It's either filling bottles, distilling, making wine. I always have something, packaging, labeling. Always I have something that I'm doing, and I like to do something with my hands. At the same, it lets me haraka barak, exactly, where movement is a blessing, and then that's one of the things I had. In addition to doing something with my hands, I remember sorry for the language, but when I was young, I remember my dad. He doesn't like people cursing in front of us when we were kids. And we had one customer come in, and he kept saying, "Put this fucking seat on this fucking car and do this fuck." And my dad got pissed. So he goes, "Take your fucking car and get the fuck out of here and never fucking come back here." And for me, that was awesome. Just to be able to have financial independence and to be able to be your own boss and decide who you work with, who you don't work with. To me, that's a luxury. And if I can be financially independent and sustain my livelihood and myself, and in addition to that, make something that I enjoy and I love, and to do something with my hands, and at the end of the day, to do something to help my people. I came here to work for humanitarian organizations, but because I'm a native English speaker, I always ended up being like the editor-in-chief of wherever I go, and I just sit behind desks doing proposals and donor reports. It's very boring. I wanted to be out in the field, meeting people, doing stuff, feeling that I'm helping people. And here, at least, I mean, the farmers that I buy grapes from, they operate in a very difficult area, and you're able to give them a financial incentive to remain resilient on their land. So for me, it served different cravings that I had, whether it was entrepreneurialism, financial independence, doing something with your hands, helping your people, and even just making really good arak and drinking it and having fun. And that's it. So that's in a nutshell. Yeah. I had inspiration from Lebanon. In Lebanon, you had these two brothers called the Ghusn brothers from Australia. And basically, after the Lebanese Civil War in the early 90s, anytime there's conflict, arak takes a dip. Right now, Syria was making good arak until the Civil War. Now it crashed. Now it's all counterfeit crap. And Iraq, it's like, I mean, they do very poor labeling. I mean, like the one guy, he names his arak like from the something chemical company. And you're like, why would you produce a beverage that has a chemical company on the label? But in Lebanon, during the Civil War, Lebanese arak, the quality crashed. And there was a lot of counterfeit, poorly distilled arak out there. And it was these two brothers from Australia who came back to Lebanon, and they started the first craft Lebanese distillery called Arak Masaya. And they put it in a blue bottle, and people were laughing at them. They're saying, you're making arak and you're putting it in a blue bottle as if it's perfume, and you're selling it for an arm and a leg. No one's going to buy it. They actually succeeded in converting many people to become enthusiastic arak drinkers, and they brought many people back. And now if you go to Lebanon, if any Lebanese person you meet will try to force feed you arak because they're very proud of it. And they forced all the other producers to step up their quality and to start making good quality arak. And it's really these two brothers to complement. So I'm hoping that I can replicate the arak revolution that they made and do an arak renaissance here. So that's the idea. So that's the idea. This is Arak Muaddi Black. This is the first limited edition release. This is waiting for my father. But I was asked the question, what is this, right? There's many elements of our drinking culture. For example, when we toast our glasses of arak, how do you toast? That's wrong. When you toast from the bottom. Because the bottom is full, the top is empty. So the toast is meaningless unless you toast from the bottom. So that's why arak is always toasted from the bottom. Also, for example, like when you make arak, there's a very important sequence to make arak. Arak, you always pour the arak first, the water second, and the ice at last. And the reason you do that is because arak, like we said, has an oil in it, the anise oil. The anise oil, like any oil, like if you have olive oil in your kitchen, in the winter, it solidifies. So if the oil solidifies, you'll have a floating layer of oil, which is unpleasant because it keeps getting on your lips. So when you make arak and you want to cool it down, you never put arak in the fridge. You can put the water in the fridge. So you put the arak first, which is room temperature. You add some cool water and then some cold ice at the end. And always when you want more arak, you should always pour a new glass because that residual water screws up the sequence and you end up getting the film. Now, when you have a large gathering of like we have today, there's no point in pouring a dozen glasses and doing each one and measuring them out 1/3, 2/3, doing the sequence out. It takes too much time. So the Arabs created this thing called the brik. This is a brik arak. It's an arak carafe. And the idea is that you fill the arak first, you fill the water, and we call it breaking the glass. When you do it, we say tiksir al-kas. That's when you make the arak. So when you break the glass, you can break the whole pitcher, and it's easier to serve arak to a big group of people rather than doing each glass individually. And it gives you more consistency because every glass comes out identical to the other. In addition to that, I was asked, what is this? This is a part of our tradition that's lost. We don't produce it anywhere today. It's only produced in Turkey today. And they name it an Arab word, or in Arab words that it's called. This is called Ahl al-Kayf in Turkey. They named it Ahl al-Kayf. Why did they name it Ahl al-Kayf? Ahl al-Kayf translates to what? People of the... Joyness. People of joy. People of joy. Yeah, so only the people of joy know what this is. This is an arak glass cooler. Basically, the problem with any spirit is that when you put ice in your spirit, the ice melts and your spirit becomes watery. So for whiskey, people began making whiskey stones. They use stones that are in the freezer instead of water, so it doesn't dilute. The Arabs, they created this. You put your cup in here, and you fill it up with water, and you freeze the water. Or you put ice in here. So it keeps your glass cool, but it doesn't dilute or mess up your mixture. So it stays one constant flavor profile, and it cools your glass, and at the same time, you don't dilute it. So this is called Ahl al-Kayf in Turkey, which is an Arabic word for people of the joy. So that's how it's made.
I can buy this from you, right?
I only have 2 left, but I have 200 coming next month, so I'll have more. Yeah, but you can buy, these are for sale, yeah.
Yeah.
Always be closing, man. Always be closing.
What's that?
So you had a sale right there. She was ready.
Yeah, no, you can take it. No, these are the last 2. You're more than welcome.
Yeah, I want that.
ايش راني؟ شو الاخبار؟ كيف حالك؟ شو الاخبار؟ شو الوضع؟ ولا يهمك.
We distribute this information also.
Of course. Yeah, definitely. I mean, you're more than well. I mean, this is it's a part of your history and your culture as much as it is mine. So I mean, it's a fact that everyone should know. So that's the idea. And hopefully, I think through the history, you can get people to become enthusiastic about it, and then you can get them to try it. So I think the history is very important when it comes to Arak, because Arak, it's a product that's been harmed through history. And by informing people about its history and making them raising their awareness about it, you can hopefully raise their enthusiasm about it. And hopefully we can preserve it. Because right now, Arak drinkers are very old and they're a dying crowd. And if you want it to carry over into the new generation, you need people to know about it and you need to build up the enthusiasm about it. So that's the idea.
Actually, I would love to supply it in my catering. So I want to talk to you about getting some of this out, because that's the thing about history. And for me, like, this is also one of the things I do. Maybe Chris knows that I dig deep in the history of the food. And I found stories about food. And the first time when I found the story of falafels, I was like really disappointed. In the same time, I was very happy. I was very happy to know the story, but at the same time, I was very disappointed in us as a people that we are willing to eat it every day, fight for it without really knowing the history. And
exactly.
The falafel tastes different after I know the history. Also especially after I know the Arak story. Now the whole Arak experience is.
It's not only that. I think now with globalization and opening up our market to new products and from exported goods, it's good to try new foods and try new things, but also to preserve what we have and to preserve our culture. Because like now you have a lot of people like going to Popeyes and Domino's and these chain food restaurants, and they're abandoning like our food. Like we have our own rich culinary heritage, which I think, I don't know what it is, like people, they like what the other has. But I think it's for us, it's important we can try Western foods, but it's important to preserve and appreciate what we have. And because I mean, it's something that we've had for countless generations and we should take care of and pass on to future generations. So basically the way I look at it is that like right now we're in between the past and the present, and we're caretakers. All of us are caretakers. You're a caretaker for food history and for food culture and introducing people to our cuisine and preserving our cuisine. Everyone is a caretaker for what's around them. For me, like our mission is to preserve our distilling heritage. We have a unique distilling heritage and we need to preserve it so future generations can enjoy it. And that's the idea. So we're caretakers for Arak. That's the way we see it.
You can follow Muaddi Distillery on Instagram and Facebook. Just go to the show notes of this podcast episode and click the link. Thank you for listening to Stories from Palestine. If you enjoy the podcast, then here are several things you can do to support the show. Tell your friends about the podcast. Share some of the social media posts on Instagram or Facebook. Start following the YouTube channel. You can also hear the podcast audio there. And soon I will start uploading videos. Sign up for the email list so that you get a reminder with a clickable link to the new podcast episode. And in the future, you will be updated about programs and trips that I will start to organize. And of course, you can donate to help me pay for hosting the podcast and the website and all the related recording costs. It's the only source of income I have at the moment, so you can imagine how much I appreciate every cup of coffee or falafel sandwich that you buy me on the Ko-fi platform. All the links that you need can be found in the show notes and on the website storiesfrompalestine.info. That's it. I hope you will tune in again next week. If you enjoy listening to Stories from Palestine podcast, then I think you will also enjoy listening to my favorite podcast, which is called Jerusalem Unplugged. You can find it on most podcast players and on social media at Jerusalem Unplugged.